tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So we've arrived at fetter number 9, restlessness, udacham. You'll know, some of you will know the Pali from the list of the 5 hindrances, udacha, kukucha. Restlessness and worry is how it's usually put there. Here, when I see just restlessness, like we've been talking about in the discussion, I'm just feeling into this base energy of not being at ease. And we're deep into the list of the fetters now. So this is, this is the 4th of the so-called higher fetters that begin with number 6, craving for form and formless meditation states, the conceit of self that we talked about last week, the deep constriction of self and other and identity and the I am. And then, the I am is still at the level of, it's like, okay, so now we're moving past craving for experiences, which is subtle experiences, form and formlessness. In the earlier fetters, you have craving for unsubtle experiences. So there's sense, desire, and ill will, numbers 4 and 5, where we're still really caught in the material world, the relational world. With the falling away from that, there's just the craving left for subtle meditative states, for deep bliss. With the falling away of those, there's, conceit, mana, that layer of just the I am, not even really my surface personality. Much of that has been understood already, seen through with Sakaya Ditti, personality view or self view. Seeing through the I am really brings me to the, almost like the base operating system of who I think I am and what it means to be in the world. And then here at restlessness, this is not the surface restlessness of, it's hard to sit still or the mind is distracted. Those are the symptoms that we contend with all the time. Here in the list of the fetters, we've been working with those all along, right? Ever since excess concentration, ever since the very beginnings of insight, you're working with the impulse toward, habitual, patterned, karmically generated movement through the body, through the heart, through the mind. So what's it doing here so deep in the list? So on the doorstep of full unbinding. I think here restlessness is a fundamental energy of existence. That there's an energy, there's an impulse in life itself to express, to unfold, to procreate, to be creative, to move. There's a fundamental movement impulse embedded in our being the kind of living being that we are. But this transcends species. This is not just being an animal or being a mammal or being a human mammal animal, and it's certainly not just about being, an earthling. These are fetters that that hinder beings of all kinds. If you are a non-returner, right, 3rd stage of awakening after stream entry and once return, you can be having a lifetime in an extremely subtle divine realm, a form realm like one of the jhanas or a formless realm. You could have an entire rebirth in the realm of nothingness. It's very, very peaceful there, right? But there's still that tiny bit of craving for the bliss of nothingness, a tiny bit of sense of like, I am the one doing this. I am the one experiencing this bliss. And there's a tiny bit of restlessness, right? Which is, there's still an impulse toward aliveness, toward life, toward doing. Even the tiniest thing, there's an impulse toward maintaining the meditative state, right? And so, you know, this gets very close to, because this is so close to unbinding, nibbana, the extinguishment of suffering completely, it gets very close to this aspect of the Buddha's teaching where all arisings can be perceived as suffering, even blissful arisings, even righteous, just, appropriate, skillful arisings. The Dhamma itself has a kind of restlessness in it, right? Because it is concerned with continuity, concerned with preserving, you know, the path of goodness in the world. Restlessness isn't bad at this. I think we're way past the ethical or unethical restlessnesses we might habitually pin to this stage. And so watch out for the feeling that this is somehow world denying or world hating or somehow, anti-life. Anti has already been let go of at Fetter 5, ill will, right? This state, I think, is more like, the movement impulse that is aliveness itself. This is like prana itself. Prana is the Sanskrit word for breath or wind, fundamental alive energy, energy of movement. It's pana in Pali. So when you get very quiet in meditation, body gets really still, mind gets really still, even if you're not in absorption per se, or particularly if you're not in you when you're not in absorption, like jhana, but you're very still, you can and so the jhana factors of like aiming and sustaining, or connecting and sustaining attention are still present. You're still aware of you're maintaining a tiny bit of effort to stay still. Then you can see this this force that we were talking about in the discussion, this force welling up from the substrate of our being, from the unconscious, maybe, if you want to think in those terms, or just from the somatic living impulse toward movement. And there's an upwelling, and it can be an impulse toward movement of the body, like it's time to move, it's time to get up, it's time to, tend the body's needs, either for food or, or movement, or, some other kind of relief from discomfort. Or it's a heart impulse, like there's an impulse to, to extend the heart in care toward another, or the heart has a response to something that's happening, You connect with the sorrow in the world, and there's a spontaneous upwelling of compassion, you know. Or, you perceive a subtle hindrance in your meditation, and there's an upwelling of active directing of the mind, connect and sustain, right? Set down the hindrance, come back to steadiness. All of these movements that have a little bit of will behind them, a little bit of agency behind them, they're all manifesting this fundamental movement principle. There is movement in the system. There's panna. There's effort. There's a little bit of effort in the system. And all of this is part of this deep udacham, restlessness, or restlessness almost sounds pejorative. We're used to using it as a pejorative. But let's get away from that for the moment, right? And just call it not being at rest, right? Body's not at rest. And there's a way that in our practice, we are invited through the course of all of the whole training, really, all of it is aimed at getting underneath or getting down to the level of, getting deep in our living system to the level where we can actually feel this very core impulse toward activity. And at that level, we start to come into the presence of an extraordinary possibility that's only possible when we can contact this very, very fundamental nature of ours. And the possibility is that we have a choice to truly stop moving, to truly let go of further activity. And there's an understanding at this level of the path that all activity is marked, right, by the mark or the characteristics of being impermanent, of being unsatisfactory, and being selfless. And so seeing that everything is marked in this way, there's, I think, a natural but strange, foreign to our normal way of thinking, uh, a kind of a final upwelling that becomes not just willing, but interested in letting this go. And being like, oh, what happens when I feel that my very existence is being propelled by a force that I did not choose, and that actually propels me into pain again and again? What if I just don't have to do that? And the Buddha uses the more surface example, just talking about healing and coming into deep steadiness in the body, freedom from fear. He uses this example in Majjhima 4 in the fear and dread discourse. He says, what if there was a person who was, walking quickly, and they noticed, this is stressful. What if I walk more slowly? Yeah, that's nice. This is still a little stressful. What if I just stand? That's less stressful. It's less effort, less work, less force. Well, this is still a little bit of work. This is stressful. What if I sit down? Oh, but if I could sit down, I can lie down. What if I just lie down? And so, this is gold for the lazy among you. You're like, yeah, this is you're singing my song, man. You know, why walk when you can stand? Why stand when you could sit? Why sit when you could lie down? And so the Buddha says, and so you exchange a subtler posture for, a grosser one, or you exchange a more restful posture for a more active one. Here at the very, very end of the path, right near the end of the path, you are finally offered the choice to choose a more restful posture than the one that's been pushing you around for all these cosmic eons. And but the uprooting of that final restlessness, it comes with the uprooting of the will to live, the will to continue. And so you can't jump to it until you're ready. Like if you try to jump to that point, but you're still just wrestling with, greed and hatred and sense desire and ill will, you're just bypassing suffering. And that's called craving for non-existence. That's the third of the types of craving in the second noble truth, right? Craving for sense pleasures, craving for existence, bhava tanha, craving for non-existence, abhava tanha, vibhava tanha. So don't jump to craving for non-existence, because that's still craving. All craving, including the craving for stillness, is an upwelling. It is one of these asava that bubbles up from the core of our being, and it has a kind of motor to it. It wants something. The only way to unbind the fetter of restlessness is to no longer want anything, And again, you can't jump to non-wanting. You could try, right? You can pretend that you no longer want things, but again, you're lying to yourself until you're really there. And I actually think that, and so I'm going to put this in a footnote in the talk, which is this is a verbal footnote. Um, I I had a feeling years ago, so I'm going to tell you what that feeling was. Maybe it's an insight, maybe it's totally wrong. So I'm stepping away from the agreement of the scholars and the monastics at this point. But I have a hunch that this point where you could choose to let go completely of uh, this underlying force of continuity of life, or not, when you get to that choice, I think that is the choice where you either become an arahant or a bodhisattva. The only difference is that the bodhisattva has has chosen to stay. They are still essentially completely enlightened. They're both actually arahants of a kind, because it's not that the bodhisattva chooses, it's not that the bodhisattva is not fully enlightened, because as soon as you have the choice to let go fully, you're enlightened. You've seen through it. You're no longer ignorant. The bodhisattva is not ignorant. So the bodhisattva actually finishes all the fetters. And then but I think at this point, you can take that life energy that is the fetter of restlessness when it's not seen clearly. And you can actually say, you know, I choose to continue the life force. And that means like be reborn, perhaps, something like that. You know, usually in a kind of cosmic state, if you're a true bodhisattva at that point. I think that's the only difference then between the arahant and the bodhisattva, is they're both fully liberated. The arahant agrees with the offer of utter stillness and says, you know what, I'll take it. It's a beautiful thing in the world for there to be arahants, for ones who actually accept the offer of unbinding fully and show to the world that that's possible and teach this is beautiful. And the bodhisattva says, yes, and I'm going to turn myself. Because I have the choice, I'm going to choose now to turn myself into the kind of being that can persistently radiate this awakening energy beyond the end of this body. And you become a kind of cosmic being in that way. So, but still completely unbound. All right, end of footnote. That's how I understand the ancient distinction between the Mahayana ideal of the Bodhisattva and the Theravadan ideal of the Arahant. Not really in contradiction. But there's a modern moment, and you'll find it in Venerable Ajahn Mun's autobiography, or biography that was written by Mahabua. And it describes Ajahn Mun's enlightenment experience, this moment. Ajahn Mun was the teacher of Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Mahabua and many others, really the founding teacher of the modern Forest Sangha, early years of the 20th century. And Mahabua narrates his attainment of arahantship. And in it, he narrates, so Ajahn Mun has told him that this was his experience, that he's on the edge of full unbinding. And he pauses for a moment, and this idea that's been, you know, around for 2,000 years, that instead of becoming an arahant, you should become a bodhisattva and you know, take further rebirth in order to save beings. And he pauses in this moment of choice, and he realizes that he has a choice, and then he decides that it's important that there are arahants in the world, that it's such an important thing to do to show people that it's possible and to be that kind of teacher, that it's appropriate now to do this. And as soon as he accepts that that is the right thing to do, he knows in his heart that that's the right thing to do, um, he crosses over, right? And um, attains perfection, attains arahantship. Um, I could go further with the footnote and say that I actually think that arahants and bodhisattvas aren't even different at all. And it's more like once you're that fully liberated, the thing you have is agency. You can choose to do whatever you want. And so if you choose to, take a certain form, you can choose to do that, right? And these are the only folks in a certain way who have full agency. Because what we mean by agency, to have will, to be able to choose what you do, actually just means like you've gotten a little wedge into your karmic stream and you're steering it a little bit. But you're a little bit like steering the roller coaster. Or you're steering a car that's careening down a hill. You have your hands on the wheel, God willing. That's mindfulness, and ethics. You've got your precepts, you've got your hands on the wheel, you're trying not to kill anybody, but you're like you're fumbling. You're trying to find the brakes, you're trying to figure out how to drive the car. You know, there's a teacher in the passenger seat, or on the stereo or whatever you've got, and they're like, find the shifter, shift down. That's all a guided meditation is. I'm trying to tell you where the brakes are, and the shifter. And you're like, yeah, man, the car is just like tearing down the hill, hitting boulders, running over pedestrians, God willing not. But we've all accidentally hit some people in our life, relationally. May they be well and safe. And like, okay, that's the path. And once you get a little traction on the path, like you've got some focus, you've trained the mind a bit, mindfulness is getting stronger, ethics are getting stronger, it's easier to resist the pull of sensual desire and ill will, hatred, etc. Um, that's like nice. You're driving the car. You've got your foot on the brake, you've got the engine brake on, you're maneuvering, you're actually missing potholes, you're not hurting anybody. You're driving so well you can have a snack while you drive. Like you get better at driving. And and of course, putting yourself in better circumstances, like hanging out with better friends, getting yourself right livelihood, that's like get off the mountain and get onto level roads again, you know, because it's very difficult to drive, you know, if you're on an unsafe road. So get yourself to safer roads. That's the material, external side of this practice. So I'm going to talk just a little bit here about kind of the modern tendencies of the mind, things that we call ADHD, other kinds of neurodiversity, um, the impact of social media and algorithms. There's so much to say and that has been, understood about this in recent years. But from the perspective of this hindrance of restlessness and then the deep fetter of restlessness, um, I want to sum all of it up in a way, by saying that the forces, mostly of greed, but let's say of greed, hatred, and delusion, all of them, in the external world, are always looking to maximize their own lifespan, profits, power, all of that. And because of that, the external environment that we navigate through, that we're trying to drive, I'll keep going with the driving simile, that we're trying to drive through, is getting more and more difficult to drive through. There's ads everywhere, there's potholes everywhere, the crowds are thicker than ever. Um, you know, and not to mention that they've hijacked the car itself, and you can't turn the radio off, and it's blaring advertisements at you, and there's screens everywhere. The our attention has always had the impulse like the Buddha called it, to be like a monkey swinging in a tree, grabbing one branch and then another and then another and then another, always reaching for the next thing. And our slogan in somatic work sometimes is attention follows intensity. So attention will naturally be drawn to the most charged or intense information in the sensory field, right? So, you know, if I'm moving across YouTube looking for, a talk, the talk where Mahabua describes Ajahn Mun's enlightenment experience, but I get there and there's a tiny little short popping up with some sexy person doing a sexy movement, some part of my whole impulse being forgets about Ajahn Mun and his enlightenment experience and wants to click on the little picture of the sexy person doing a sexy thing. And and you know, the entirety of our day sometimes now is filled with these things, not just on the media, but if you listen to ancient history and they're like, the population of ancient Athens at its peak was 200,000 people, and I'm like, that's the small town I grew up in, you know, and 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 you're like, dude, I live in like Brooklyn or whatever. Like, um, just everything was smaller and more spread out. You know, when the Buddha said, I'm leaving the city to live in the wilderness, he was leaving a city of, you know, 30, 40,000 people, and he was walking to a nice tended park on the outskirts of town, owned by some nice landlord who supported him with alms food. And they parked themselves, you know, often in tended parks. Like the Buddha and his monks are meditating there in the park. Somebody comes up to the park, and the park ranger says, oh, princes, don't party in the park today. There are honorable mendicants there seeking the way of peace. And you know, so like they're in the wilderness, but it's just a much smaller place, and they're walking distance from town. If you're in here in the Bay Area, in the East Bay, it's like the Buddha's great wilderness monastery, was essentially in like, Tilden Park, um, or Redwood Regional. I would love to have a little monastery up there. So nice. So, everything is more complex and faster and brighter and more stimulating and more intense. But it's actually just a difference um, not in quality, but in quantity. I think. I think. I'm not completely sure as I say that. I think everything is sped up and there's more of it and it's more manipulative. Um, but from a Dharma perspective, it's still just, I say just, this doesn't make it any easier, but it's still just sensory experience, right? The Buddha would say, I will tell you the all. What is the all? The eye and sights, the ear and sounds, the nose and smells, the mouth and tastes, the body and sensations, the heart, mind, and cognitions. That is all. That's all there is. That's it. And so when my ADHD is pinging and I can't get past the troll of YouTube looking for, the thing I need to put in, my nice orderly research paper, and I have to fight my way past the sexy people and the dramatic images and the bit of news that I must watch right now and all the things. Um, or I'm just walking down the street and I'm trying to be peaceful, but I'm noticing everything, I notice all the people and I notice all the shops and I notice the birds and I notice the squirrels and of course I notice all the things that I'm planning and afraid of, and it's all present in a kind of jangly, hyper stimulated environment. One of the things that I can do as I train, is I can do what we did in meditation. I can stop, So stop means sometimes physical, sometimes mental, emotional, but I stop the monkey swinging just for a moment. And then I think the most important step is the soften. So I don't just stop and try to clamp down, focus. I stop, I soften, and then I stay. So tonight I'm using these 3 words: stop, soften, stay. So the stopping, there's a kind of, there's an intervention. Mindfulness makes this intervention possible. So you notice that you're lost or where your senses are going, you stop, right? You set down whatever it is. Or you just, and then you soften, you relax. Relax the body if you can, but also relax that impulse, relax out of that impulse of the mind to go searching. So you just get really still. And you can do this by connecting with your immediate senses. So let your eyes be open, your ears, your body, but not eyes in the like I'm looking around, searching around, looking in shop windows, looking at attractive people, whatever, scary people. I'm softening also the sensory inputs. So I'm just present in the visual field, but I'm not reaching out. So stop, we soften. And then stay is really just a practice of getting used to that state of having stopped and softened. And staying means stay soft. Because all of these impulses, all of these restlessnesses, whether it's the surface level bubbling of the attention that can't stay, with a train of thought, or of process, or the deep restlessness of, the life impulse itself. The thing that we want to learn is that it's safe to soften and stay. I think the impulse of restlessness in the modern world partly is a trauma response to the feeling of unsafety, right? Attention follows intensity, so I'm going to keep looking for the danger in the space. And that includes, like, I can't tolerate the dangerous feeling called boredom or stillness, and so I keep looking for something to fill it or to grasp onto. And the algorithms are patently malevolent, right? They are designed to capture attention. They are kidnap devices. They, they are also a useful tool, which is part of why they're so powerful. And part of our core skill and training must be to learn to get fluent with our own nervous system so deeply that we're actually not just like using all of our barriers, using all of our shut down, brick the phone, shut down the apps, keep myself on a Pomodoro timer all the time. Like, do that if it helps. But the deeper training that the Dharma points toward is actually the ability to be aware of those things and aware of the impulse to go toward them, and to be able to actually resist that impulse, to understand that I'm still okay and safe and I can be happy and entertained without needing to click on the little picture of the dancing person or the whatever thing I'm clicking on, or the refreshing the news for the 50th time. And I will totally tell you that I have not got this mastered. I click on the little picture, I read the news too much. It is very difficult to do this, but I can feel as I practice the way that the Dhamma that the Buddha taught for overcoming these states of profound distress and suffering, that it is the only thing that really gets beneath it, right? There's all of these ways to resist that force, and so many of them are useful. But it really is this training in samadhi, which is training in sustaining the perception of my own safety, even though all of my impulses tell me otherwise. This is, I think, the training that that will protect us in in the in the the attentional ecosystem that we find ourselves largely living in. So, restlessness, udacham, deep, fetter. There's one more to go. Primordial ignorance. We'll do next week. So thank you for listening.